Senior trips are coming up. Have you thought through yours? I imagine you have, but have you really thought about it? We're really going to think about senior trips today on the Christian Principles Podcast, so come and join us.
The Christian Principles Podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation, but bear in mind the views and opinions expressed here are those of the hosts and not necessarily of the Herzog Foundation. We have less than 10 spots remaining for the Maryland Association of Christian Schools Administrators Retreat happening on March 24th in Hartford County, Maryland. Please be sure to email mark at christianprinciplespodcast.com to register for the event. 8:30 to 3 p.m., free for Max Admin and only $20 for others. You won't want to miss this encouraging time together. Invest in yourself and your school for His glory. We can't wait to see you there. Welcome to the Christian Principles Podcast. I'm Matt George.
And I'm Mark Zockel. I'm excited about senior trips today because that means students are leaving us.
Well, unless you're going with, but yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, no.
Oh,
Senior trips,
man.
I always look forward to senior trips.
We were going to talk about the ins and the outs, the whys, why we do what we do, why we don't do what we don't do, where we wouldn't send kids, who should be planning them, and all that. And we're really going to try to keep this one to 25 minutes. So we're going to,
It's going to happen.
yeah, we're going to make it happen.
Not quite a lightning pod.
No, it's going to go back to what our original purpose was. I haven't really been reviewing the numbers to see if people are listening to longer or shorter or whatnot, or like when they stop listening, but maybe we can just throw a bone here because the last few have been kind of long. But before we do that, let's go ahead and hear from the Herzog Foundation.
The Christian Principles Podcast is excited to share that we've joined the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network, a hub dedicated to advancing K-12 education and the Christian values we all share. The Herzog Foundation exists to catalyze and accelerate the development of quality Christ-centered K-12 education nationwide, helping families and culture flourish. One of their most impactful resources for Christian school leaders like us is the Herzog Foundation Institute. This program offers fully funded training events and retreats, enabling us to sharpen our skills without adding cost to our schools. Led by national experts, these events cover essential topics like marketing, donor development, and culture building, all tailored to the unique needs of Christian schools. Held monthly in Kansas City and other locations across the country, these events equip schools and their leaders with the tools and strategies they need to thrive. Don't miss the opportunity to explore all the Herzog Foundation has to offer. Together, we can strengthen Christ-centered education. Learn more at herzogfoundation.com. That's herzogfoundation.com. All right, let's get down to the discussion, shall we?
Let's do it.
Senior trips.
Mm-hmm.
Lots to consider.
Let's start with the building where we should be starting. And before we build, we have to know why we're doing it in the first place. So if I just ask you right now, why does your school have a senior trip? Why do you make that a part of the tradition at Faith Baptist School there in Salisbury, Maryland?
Yeah.
Why do you do that?
I always looked at the senior trip as like a capstone. You're putting the cap at the end, but giving your seniors an opportunity to yes, a kind of a last hurrah type of thing, but to take a serious look at where they've come from and where they're going. And your senior trip, getting away from campus, I don't know, just I feel like it opens that door up a lot easier than just pulling them together into your office and say, okay, let's look ahead. What are we going to do?
Well, hey, as long as the actual chaperones are doing that, that sounds awesome. I'm not convinced, though, that every set of chaperones that go on a senior trip actually makes them think about what's coming next in their lives.
And so that's going to lead us into who goes with. Right?
Absolutely. And the mission behind it. You've presented this didactic purpose, not just get together last hurrah, but also to have some thoughts about, hey, what's coming next? What are we doing? And perhaps if we haven't had, by this point, I'm imagining you've had one-on-ones with all of your seniors in some way, shape, or form. So maybe that's not something that you do on this trip. Maybe this trip for your school is complete relaxation and celebration. I don't really believe that because at some point, I imagine as a Christian school doing all that we do to the glory of God, it's not just celebrate as hard as you can for God's glory, but it's also going to be figuring out, how can I encourage these students to do one more thing, take one more step down their spiritual walk as well. So,
Yeah.
but I think that's dependent on the chaperone. Okay, so
Yeah.
chaperone talk. You got to find somebody or some buddies who are able to take off vacation days or early in the year to
Yeah.
to go ahead, and you got to find, if you got guys and gals going, you're going to find a guy and a gal to go with. And for purposes of planning, it's probably easier to have, I guess it is, it's not easier to have a couple going. So there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What do you think?
A big part of that is the size of your senior class, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Because I know, thinking of my school, not only the school I'm leading right now, but also the school I grew up in, relatively small classes. So there's a little bit more flexibility, so to speak. I mean, granted, the time is going to stay the same. Having a mixture of genders is potentially, it's going to be the same. But you're larger, of course, larger classes are going to require more chaperones. So more difficult to fill, as you were saying, having the appropriate people that are going to further the mission and the heart for what you're doing. But
Absolutely, yeah.
I know for many years, my school always did it where you had a class advisor that kind of followed you from ninth grade all the way through your senior year. And then it was always going to be that teacher's responsibility to be the main chaperone. But then if additional chaperones were needed, they would recruit, which does end up being spouse as the second one.
Sure.
Typically.
It's interesting that we are okay with looping when it comes to senior trips. We're not really okay, or the faculty advisor is a looped position year by year. But when it comes to education outside of that, we're not as comfortable with looping as perhaps maybe our Jesuit forefathers were and whatnot. So interesting. When we think about our larger classes, though, at some point the senior trip just becomes an almost untenable thing to be done. It to be done with any great regularity. I say that, but I was at an Orioles game at Camden Yards this previous year. Looking forward to going a few more this year. And there was an 8th grade trip that took up the 12th and 13th row off the field, and they had 80 students, and I don't know how many chaperones, and they were from California. So it was an 8th grade trip from California. They had flown. They had enough chaperones to make it happen. And overall, sitting around them, for what you can see, they were having a great time. And the chaperones were talking about the trip and what they were doing, and it was pretty amazing. They had been to Annapolis earlier that day, and then they had gone to Fort McHenry, and then they were at the Camden Yards. So they had a full just one of the days, and they were out for at least a week, I think it was. So maybe you even have an 8th grade trip or something to enter into this mix. But either way, the more you get, the more chaperones. And I got to think, that's got the school's name on it. Those chaperones have to be vetted individuals.
And this is the point. Just for the past couple of years, I haven't really implemented this a ton, but because of this very point that we're talking about, that's been me. I want to be that chaperone. And we'll talk more of the way senior trips are set up, but at the very least, we have a central spiritual element to our senior trips that I wanted to ensure was being impressed upon our kids and getting the feedback. And not to say I don't trust anybody else, but the buck stops here. That's kind of the way I look at it and view it. So for the past couple of years anyway, I've made sure that I'm the one able to do that. But doesn't make it any easier even when I know it's me.
Not at all. And of course, if we're talking about larger classes perhaps that need more than just that, the guy and the gal, they're going to have to, let's say you don't want any more than 1 per 7 or 1 per 8, 1 per 10, something like that. I don't know what the numbers would be, but let's just say that's, you got a class of 40 or 60, you're pulling for more. But maybe it would make sense to me that there has to be some representation of faculty or staff on that trip. There can't not be. Or I said can't. Of course there could be, but it makes sense that there's got to be a core of that chaperone body that is well in line with the school and what the school has going on, and probably probably pretty high level, because they're taking students off campus. It's a big deal.
And I'll share
maybe a little bit of a negative side, and or at least a pointer is, I've seen a history of using a parent to go along,
Sure.
and that can either be really good or really bad. So,
And that would be the next place most would turn. If they don't can't get the
yeah,
faculty or
I
staff,
mean,
you turn
it
to the
makes
parents who
sense.
you're already partnering with. It makes
They're
sense, like you said.
invested,
Yeah.
right? And,
Hmm.
but at the same time, like there have been enough reasons to not put parents into that situation. Like you don't even want them to necessarily, even if they are good parents, you trust them implicitly, like just to put them in a situation where they're calling you and they're saying, "Hey, I don't know how to deal with this situation because I am a parent
Hmm.
and this needs to be handled." Like it's really tricky. Not to say that it's impossible, but it's definitely very low on our priority list. Like only if we are completely out of options,
Absolutely.
would we go to parents.
I think about what you're saying, and the only way around that sort of thing is you got to write stuff down. If
Yeah.
it's not written down that your senior trip, in this case, you've referenced that your senior trip is very much it's didactic. It's going to have both a spiritual emphasis and it's going to have a celebratory emphasis and it's going to have even a look at life emphasis, which
Yep.
that goes back to missional. That's missional for you. That it's the pursuing excellence and what happens after
Hmm.
the schooling as well. If that's not written down and then able to be fully enunciated to those chaperones you're bringing on, that's a school problem. That's a developmental problem. I'm just trusting that it's going to go well. And you're probably going to get a less than stellar review of what has occurred in that senior trip. And of course, the parents may not make the same decisions. We said a
Right.
couple episodes ago that some parents send the kids to school with the understanding that they're getting hit on the playground, they start to swing back.
Hmm.
If you get swung at, you swing back. And these are parents that we love and partner with that are teaching that, but we would say no, you don't. You do
Right.
not teach your child to go ahead and swing back.
Yeah.
Well, those same parents are going to make perhaps those kind of decisions on
On
those
the road.
trips as
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
because they're thinking about Jimmy or Susie or whatever happens to be right there in front of them. And even, especially if there has been some kind of beef between their kid and another kid, you're
Yeah.
automatically setting up yourself and the other kid and the other kid's family perhaps to be at
Yeah.
odds from the start. That's not going to be as
Now,
healthy as otherwise.
to say this, because even if the parent is faculty, like
Oh,
it's
sure.
still that still kind of knocks them down a little bit when I'm trying to decide and who's going to go along.
Hmm.
If their parents, it's a difficult situation that I don't want to put them in. We also shouldn't discredit, especially for our schools. Perhaps your senior pastor of your church has
Hmm.
expressed interest in being
Sure.
a part of that,
The youth
or the
pastor.
youth pastor.
Yep.
Those are definitely go tos if you are
Hmm.
into a position. If you haven't already set it up, where I know of some schools that the senior pastor takes them on the senior trip.
How awesome is
Um,
that, though, to get that kind of time with those students? Those are the
yeah,
product of your ministry. You get to go with them.
yeah.
And yeah,
And the other
that's
ones I
great.
see a lot would be like coaches. So they may
Sure.
not be necessarily full time
Hmm.
staff, but they've had to buy into the mission to put that into play for the athletic programs. So carry it through
Here's
with
another
their
idea.
kids.
Here's another idea. We keep coming up with these ideas to make money off of, but perhaps we have a vetted senior trip chaperone group of individuals who they just sell themselves as I will be
That's great.
whatever kind of senior trip chaperone you want me to be. You want me to be a stick in the mud? I'll be the best stick in the mud you got. You want me to be permissive and just let whatever happens happens? I'll be permissive and let whatever happens. I think that would be that could be
Yeah.
make some money.
The the big thing though that I think is a really important thing beyond who we as a school trust. I
Hmm.
think it's really important to have people that the seniors trust,
Okay,
and the seniors
interesting. Yeah.
are going to open up to and relate with, because it's
Hmm.
tricky to you know accomplish the things we're trying to accomplish with somebody they don't know.
Going back to that mission, what is the mission of this senior trip? What is the purpose of this senior trip? Is it just to do what everybody else does, which we can't do in Christian Ed, right? We
Right.
can't just do it because everybody else is doing it. So let's get away from the chaperone. We've talked a little about the mission. We've said some things about how your mission would include both a celebration and a let's spiritually look at where we are and look at where we want to go, and then even professionally or personally where we want to go from here.
Yeah.
So there are senior trips out there which change every year, and where they're going changes, and it's based on how much money was raised or how much, how many, what the general vision of that class is. And there are senior trips out there that are the exact same every single year. And there's places you can go to get senior trips provided for you. You're just paying a third-party agency to create the trip and take you on the trip, and you're just sending the students and the money and the stuff and the chaperones, and they're providing the guide or whatever else. What's your setup? How does it look like?
Long history. Well, let me just say this.
Sure.
My school growing up, as well as our school here, and I know of many other schools that do this as well, there is a portion of the senior trip that is consistent. Every year it's the same.
Gotcha.
While there may be a variable that you put on top of it. So it's not a completely different trip every single year. But I will say I am a huge fan of the same trip every year. And I'm actually working on getting that set up for my school.
It's hard not
but when
to
you're
be.
coming out of a culture where they have that flexibility, these kids have been looking and planning, and so when they get into their senior year, did they be the first one where I say, well, actually, you're going to do what we tell you and not what you want, like that. It's a tough sell, but I think we're getting there of keeping it consistent.
Especially if you want some kind of mission trip involved. I shouldn't say especially, because it go either way. If a different mission trip just pops around different parts of the earth. We've already talked about with Dr. Leslie Nichols the opportunities to do missions trips just as a school body, let alone seniors. But perhaps part of your senior trip, you want it to be a missions trip as well. You could bump around to different places, but it's also really cool to be able to see a relationship built with some subset of person that you're ministering to over the years, with the same pictures passed down year by year, and then the same activities that they would do at the same spot. For you and going to the Wilds Christian Camp makes for a not only a time of the whole idle hands of the Devil's Workshop, downtime on those trips, so the scariest times, especially if it's not a faculty or staff member who's the one running it. So somewhere where they are secluded is the wrong word, but in a situation where they have a scheduled day provided that we're not having to create, but we're getting to facilitate and be a part of.
Beautiful.
And there's lots of activities meant for students of that age, not for younger kids or for older, for adults or whatnot. If you just hit a random city and had to plan your own thing, there's a lot to be liked about going to a camp for a senior trip, at least for part of it anyway.
The other thing, and I'll just throw this element since we're talking about it, but probably more. I mean, granted, the schedule is huge. That's a wonderful thing. You don't have to think about all of those details. Food is taken care of, sleeping, all that kind of stuff. Nice. But for me, the other thing is that these kids get to interact with other seniors. So they're all going through the same experience. And then I've always found, I don't think there's been a senior trip with this portion of the trip at the camp where we haven't walked away with, that I thought I had it bad, or I thought, we were unique in this sense. And talking with these other kids from these schools all around the country, that's a special thing. And it really kind of opens your eyes. And it's because of that. I know we haven't quite got into when we do this, but I always have thought if we could start the year with the senior trip, it would be an amazing thing.
Yeah,
but
I hear you.
It's really hard to do.
Really hard to rock that boat and just to be gone, especially if it is you being gone. Yeah.
Yeah, the seniors always come back from that with just the energy and fire to be leaders that they are. So
true enough. The timing, I don't think we're gonna get the timing and everything else. We've got to keep moving. But another thing that we should get to is what are some pitfalls or some things to look out for one way or the other. I would say something to look out for is to make sure these trips are not too long. You absolutely can have a trip that is too long, and that could change year by year. So I had a subset of students that I remember leaving the first week, which when I was at Faith and I left, I was myself going with them down. Actually, it might have been when I was a teacher there. Actually, I went down with a subset of students, and I remember leaving with them after the week of the Wilds, which that is especially for students who haven't, and some of these students, they've never been gone for anywhere near that long. They don't do they don't do those kind of trips away from their parents, especially not some of them who are not used to physical activity. They're not used to moving around that much. There's just a level of physical tiredness which occurs leaving that camp after that trip that I was not ready for. It was half the students. They were probably willing to go home at that point, but they had another like 4 or 5 days planned, and we were going to be going to different places, which of course, lots of driving time and downtime, and of course, if there's any kind of issues amongst the team, if the camaraderie isn't quite as there as we would want it to be, that could be really rough. Has there been a recent breakup, or somebody else is with somebody else? Like there's definitely pieces of that to watch out for. And that only, of course, grows with the size of the senior class. So sometimes it's better to retire early.
Yeah.
Don't
less
let
is
these,
more.
Yeah, less is definitely more. And the other thing I would say is I don't hand the devil's workshop in this way, that especially if it's not one of the vetted faculty or staff on the trip for whatever reason, or even if it is, making sure you've planned too much to do.
Yeah.
Because planning free time, like I think about camps. When a camp has a free time, it's free time, but you're going to be going to one of the pre-planned activities, which means it's all structured anyway. Well, in these situations, it's free time, but what they're thinking of free time is just hangout time. That could go south real fast. So,
and that I think is the selling point for me as to why you do a packaged senior trip.
Absolutely.
Because you find that niche, you find what works consistently with the varying size of groups and the varying personalities, and when you've pinpointed the perfect blend of whether you have a spiritual and a fun trip or whatever else, like as we say with many other things, can it up, put it on the shelf, sell it, because that's what you're really looking for. Now, the other big thing I would say, as we're just saying things to watch out for, make sure that you are giving the students opportunity to be involved with the planning of the trip, but not dictating as to what the trip needs to be and looking like. Like, we have to retain control of that trip for everything that we've been saying up to this point. Like, missionally, why are we doing this? It's not just a vacation and they want to, check off bucket list items. Like, that's not the purpose of this. It's not their personal vacation time. Although we definitely want to celebrate them and we definitely want them to have an enjoyable time. But that's where you have them involved. If you know you're going to be staying in a certain area and you need either an Airbnb or some kind of rental that you're looking for, let them look for it, but you're going to have the final say. Don't just,
I was going to say, some of what you're saying now, I hear you saying that as from an administrator who you've got the plan, you know where you want to go, and you do want to can it. And so there's going to be a lot less of that individuality than maybe our peer institutions are going to, and even want for their senior class. Like maybe it's even a class project that this is the capstone. You're going to create and plan and present this, and then you're going to execute it by actually going on it. Maybe that is something they value, but to your point, at the end of the day, you need to be able to check off on every single piece of it and say, I saw this, Mom and Dad. I knew this was coming, Mom and Dad. Yes, that did have my approval. Or, they acted out of the guidelines that I gave them, which, don't put yourself in that position. Know what's going on.
Yep. Yeah, and of course, there's fundraising that perhaps needs to go along with it. I know some people will have, some schools, I say people, some schools may have their seniors contribute so much to the senior trip. I really work hard to make it to help the kids fundraise so that they don't have to be contributing, and it's not a factor where Mom and Dad can say, well, we're just not going to send them on the trip because the finances are tight or something. Like, remove finances as an issue. We actually put if you're going to graduate from our school, you have to be a part of this trip. Like, you can't just
I wanted to make sure they
balance.
hit that before we left as well, because if it's going to be mandatory, it's mandatory. If you're
Yeah.
going to have that mission mindedness, this is part of their spirit. We're going to make this part of their biblical curriculum before they leave us, is to go and be a part of this missionally aligned missions trip or
Yep.
service opportunity or time away spent with these speakers that we trust through this camp or whatever it happens to be. Got to write it down, because there's going to be challenges there. Absolutely will be challenges there. And what your off ramp is otherwise, because someone's going to get sick, and then someone else who didn't want to go but was made to go, they get to graduate even though they were sick, but I didn't want to go this, and you threatened my graduation or whatever it happens to be. Just be very clear on that. And that's another reason to make sure it's awesome, not boring. Because if it's boring, they're not going to want to go on it. But if it's awesome, maybe they'll pass it down to their friends. It was worth going on.
I'll just, as we finish, I want to share this because it was, I remember leading up to my senior year, we always had a follow-up time, and this is something to encourage. You have a chapel afterwards where the seniors get to share the things they got to experience on their senior trip. It's a great thing to do, but it was always comical to us because we would hear the seniors beforehand just dreading the, like, dude, we don't want to go, we don't want to do this, especially like talking about the wilds. Like, everybody was always, we don't want to go to the wilds. Why do we have to go to the, we're being forced to go to the wilds. And then hands down, every single time that they did their report in chapel, the wilds was the best part. And they are so glad they went, and they wish they could go again. And, it was always that way. And I remember telling my senior class, can we please not be like that? Can we just look forward to it the whole time?
Enjoy the whole time.
And just,
absolutely.
And then just know we're going to have a blast, which we did. It was great.
That's great.
And that's what I tell our seniors here.
Yeah, there's so much more to say about this, and we only hit the big stuff. Talk to us. Let us know what is your senior trip? How is it unique? How is it not? How is it just like this? Does it exist? Tell us how you would want to build it. Get us behind what you're doing. Let us know about it. But let's move on to our Christian Administrator Spotlight today.
It is time for the Spotlight. And for this episode, we're shouting out Sharon Elzey.
All right, Miss Sharon Elzey, and she is the principal and the head of school. It's actually both titles, which is interesting. She is at Lighthouse Christian School in Dagsboro, Delaware, which is awesome, pretty close to us. They were a part of many of the athletic competitions that I had when I was at Faith, and then even at my second installment, where we were in athletic competition with this K through 8th grade school. And I know that she had a 40-year career prior in public schooling at two different Delaware, like a resort area schools, or on that side of the house anyway, including 28 years as a computer science teacher. So there you go. So this is the, like many of our brothers and sisters, this is the retirement gig for our for some of our peer admins. So Matt, you wanna pray for Ms. Elzey today? Mm-hmm.
Father, we thank you so much that we have the opportunity to encourage our sister in Christ, who is a fellow laborer in Christian education. I just pray that you would help her in her role there in leading Lighthouse, and just may she continue on to have the strength that she needs, the support she needs from her faculty, from her students and other families. And Lord, we just thank you so much for Sharon, and pray that you would bless her throughout the rest of this year. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, Matt. Well, we've done a lot.
That's it.
But, there's a lot left to do. So we'll get there at some point. We'll actually finish one of these talks, maybe never, because there's always something more to say. And that's where you come in and help us get there. So
it's fun.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I really am. Hey, guys, thanks for growing with us today.
Could we ask you a favor? Please help us grow our channel by clicking on the plus follow button at the top of the screen on Apple Podcasts, or the follow button on the main podcast page on Spotify. Taking this step helps boost our ratings, but more importantly, gets us in more Christian school admins' ears. Also, it'll keep our latest content in your feed. This little action could help us take this podcast a long way.